The guests gasped, the music stopped, and the bride's smile froze as a young boy's trembling voice cut through the wedding hall. Dad, you can't marry her. She's not who you think she is. What followed turned a day of celebration into a nightmare, and ended with a desperate call to 911. The wedding hall sparkled with fairy lights and flowers that filled the air with the scent of roses and lilies, the kind of atmosphere that promised happiness, laughter, and a fresh beginning. Richard, a wealthy businessman in his late 40s, stood proudly at the altar, adjusting his suit nervously while his fiancée, a stunning woman in her early 30s named Vanessa, glided down the aisle in a flawless white gown. Everything seemed perfect to the guests who watched with admiration, whispering about how lucky Richard was to have found love again after the tragic loss of his first wife. But while applause and smiles filled the room, there was one face in the crowd that didn't match the joy. The face of Daniel, Richard's 15-year-old son, who sat at the very back of the hall, fists clenched tightly in his lap and eyes fixed on the bride. To everyone else, Vanessa was beautiful, charming, and kind, but Daniel knew something that made his stomach churn every time he looked at her. He had tried telling his father before, but Richard had brushed it off as teenage jealousy, convinced his son just couldn't accept someone new in their lives. As the minister began speaking, Daniel's heartbeat thundered in his ears, drowning out the words. He thought about his mother, about how she had died in a car accident 2 years earlier, and how quickly his father had fallen for Vanessa afterward. Something about her had never sat right with him. She was always overly sweet in public but cold and sharp when no one else was looking. And lately, Daniel had discovered something he could no longer keep to himself. He rose slowly from his chair, his legs shaking, but his voice was clear and strong enough to silence the room as he shouted, "Stop. Dad, don't marry her. You can't." Gasps rippled through the guests as every eye turned toward the boy standing at the back of the hall. Richard's face went pale, his brow furrowing with confusion and embarrassment, while Vanessa's perfect smile flickered like a candle in the wind. The minister froze, holding his Bible mid-sentence, as silence blanketed the room. Richard's voice boomed with anger and confusion. "Daniel, what on earth are you doing?" But Daniel didn't back down. His chest heaved as he said loudly, "She's lying to you. She's not who you think she is. And if you marry her, it won't just ruin your life. It could end it." The room erupted into chaos, some guests whispering in disbelief, others craning their necks to see what Daniel would say next. Vanessa's face turned pale for a moment before she quickly composed herself, letting out a nervous laugh and placing a delicate hand on Richard's arm. "Oh, Richard," she said softly, her voice trembling but still sweet, "he's just a boy. He doesn't understand. He's grieving his mother, and he doesn't want to see you move on. Please, don't let him ruin this moment for us." Richard's jaw tightened, torn between his son's desperation and his fiancée's plea. But Daniel shook his head fiercely and stepped forward, his voice sharper now, cutting through the murmurs. "No, Dad, you don't get it. She's dangerous. I saw her, I know what she's been hiding." The guests fell silent again, the weight of his words sinking into the air. Vanessa's eyes darted nervously, though she tried to maintain her composure. "That's enough," Richard snapped, but Daniel pressed on, his voice cracking with urgency. "I followed her, Dad. Last week when she said she was going shopping with her friends, she wasn't. She went to a hotel. I saw her with a man, and they weren't just talking. They were planning something. I recorded part of it on my phone." His hands trembled as he pulled out his phone from his pocket, unlocking it with shaky fingers. A hush fell over the crowd as he pressed play. The muffled audio filled the hall, Vanessa's unmistakable voice whispering sharply, "He's almost ready to marry me. Once the wedding's done and the papers are signed, everything he owns will be ours. Then we'll make it quick, an accident, maybe. No one will ever suspect." Gasps echoed around the hall. Some women covered their mouths, and men shook their heads in disbelief. Richard's face turned ghostly white, his hand slipping away from Vanessa's arm as he staggered back a step. Vanessa's composure cracked, her eyes flashing with panic before narrowing with anger. "That's not real," she hissed, her voice shaking now. "He faked that. It's just a stupid trick because he hates me. Don't listen to him, Richard." But Daniel stood firm, tears brimming in his eyes. "I wish it was fake, Dad. I wish I was lying. But I've seen the messages too, on her phone. She's been planning this with him for months. She doesn't love you. She just wants your money. And once she gets it, you'll be gone. The guests were now whispering louder, some even shouting in outrage. Richard looked between his son and his fiancée, sweat forming on his forehead, his mind racing as the weight of betrayal began to crush him. Vanessa's mask was slipping quickly, her breathing uneven, her smile gone, her eyes dark. Then she did something no one expected. She reached into her clutch and pulled out something metallic. The glint of it caught the light. Someone screamed, "She's got a knife." The scream sent the entire wedding hall into panic. Guests leapt from their chairs, some ducking under tables while others rushed toward the exit. The music had stopped long ago, but now the hall was filled with shrieks, gasps, and the sound of chairs scraping against the polished floor. Richard froze for a second, his eyes wide in disbelief as he stared at the weapon clutched in Vanessa's trembling hand. It was small but deadly, a concealed blade that had been hidden in her purse. Her beautiful bridal gown and flawless makeup could no longer hide the venomous rage in her eyes. "You stupid little brat," she hissed, her voice nothing like the gentle tone she had used before. "You ruined everything." She lunged forward, not at Richard, but at Daniel. Richard's instincts kicked in, his fatherly instinct stronger than his shock. He dove between them, grabbing Vanessa's wrist with both hands just as she tried to slash toward Daniel. The strength in her arms startled him, her desperation turning her into someone almost unrecognizable. They struggled, the knife glinting dangerously inches from his chest. Guests screamed louder, some trying to intervene, others too terrified to move. Daniel stumbled backward, his phone clattering to the floor as tears streamed down his face. "Dad!" he shouted, his voice raw with fear. Richard gritted his teeth, pushing against Vanessa with all his strength. "How could you?" he shouted. "After everything, after I trusted you, after I let you into my family." Vanessa snarled, her perfect bride image now completely shattered. "You were weak, Richard. So desperate for love, for someone to fill the void your pathetic wife left behind, that you didn't even see me coming. You made it too easy." Her words cut deeper than the blade ever could. With a sudden burst of strength, Richard twisted her wrist until the knife clattered onto the floor. Immediately, a few brave guests rushed forward, pinning Vanessa down as she thrashed and screamed. Daniel collapsed into his father's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. Richard held him tightly, his own tears mixing with sweat as he whispered, "I'm so sorry, son. I should have listened. I should have trusted you. But it wasn't over." Vanessa's accomplice, the man Daniel had seen her with, burst through the side doors of the hall, his face twisted with fury. "Vanessa!" he shouted, pulling something from his jacket. For a split second, time seemed to stop as Richard realized what it was. A gun. Chaos exploded again as guests screamed and ducked for cover. The man aimed the gun at Richard, his finger twitching on the trigger, but before he could fire, a courageous guest, a veteran who had been sitting near the aisle, lunged at him from the side. The shot went off, shattering a chandelier above the altar and raining glass down across the floor. Panic surged as people scrambled, but the veteran wrestled the gunman to the ground, punching and grappling until the weapon skidded across the floor out of reach. Richard, his body trembling, grabbed Daniel and pulled him behind him protectively. Vanessa was still screaming, pinned to the floor by two men, her once beautiful gown now torn and stained. The sound of sirens wailed in the distance. Someone must have already called the police, but Richard knew time was running out. With shaking hands, he pulled out his phone and dialed 911. His voice was raw and broken as he shouted into the receiver, "This is Richard Carter. We're at St. Matthew's Church. My fiancée just tried to kill me and my son. She had an accomplice with a gun. Please, we need help now." The dispatcher's calm but urgent voice responded, assuring him officers were on their way, but Richard's heart pounded so hard he could barely hear her. Within minutes, flashing red and blue lights lit up the stained glass windows, and heavily armed officers stormed into the hall, weapons raised, ordering everyone to stay down. They quickly disarmed the accomplice and restrained Vanessa, dragging her away as she screamed curses at Richard and Daniel, her mask of innocence completely gone. The guests slowly began to rise, shaken but alive, whispering in shock about what they had just witnessed. Richard sank to his knees, hugging Daniel so tightly it hurt. Tears streamed down his face as the weight of the moment hit him. He had almost married the woman who planned to kill him, and it was only because of his son's courage that he was still alive. An officer approached, taking his statement gently while paramedics checked on him and Daniel. Vanessa and her accomplice were shoved into separate police cars, their futures sealed in handcuffs. As the cars drove away, Richard whispered to his son, "You saved my life, Daniel. You saved us both. I'll never doubt you again." Daniel, still trembling, buried his face in his father's shoulder, whispering back, "I just couldn't let her take you away too." The nightmare was over, but the bond between father and son had been reforged in fire. The wedding that was supposed to mark a new beginning had instead exposed a dangerous truth, and reminded Richard of the one thing he should have known all along. Sometimes, the only person who truly sees the danger, is the one who loves you the most. One boy's courage saved his father's life. Sometimes the truth is painful, but silence can be deadly. Always listen to those who love you the most, because their warnings may one day save you. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Kindness Vibes for more life-changing, emotional stories that open hearts and open eyes. Your support helps us spread kindness and awareness to the world.